What's up, Professor Wergeles here. We are on lecture number 10. We're going to go over Angular, and we're going to look at Angular routing specifically. So you'll want to make sure you go over the previous Angular lecture, and I also released a Bootstrap lecture. Okay, you'll see my previous Angular lecture. I actually released some videos on the course playlist, and then I have a Bootstrap lecture. That is pretty much just some code that you can look at, all the different Bootstrap classes, and try to get a better understanding of Bootstrap since we were using it in the previous lecture on 8. And then here on lecture 10, we're going to look at routing. And we're actually going to fix up the previous Angular application. So you'll want to make sure you go through that video. You'll also want to make sure you go over the Angular documentation. So if you look up Angular and you go to Angular IO, they actually have a few docs here that are very important. So when you go to try, you want to go over getting started, adding navigation, managing data, using forms for user input, and deploying an application. Okay, in fact, adding navigation is something similar that we're going to be using today. Okay, so it talks about Angular routing, and it's just a very basic tutorial. You'll see all the tutorials aren't very long. They're probably half a page long. Okay, some of them are a little bit longer. And you'll see they actually have more. So if you want to learn more about routing and navigation, you can then read the longer tutorial, okay, that talks more about Angular routing and how to use it. So that's what we're going to be going over today. Now, first things first, we need to start over here in the terminal. Okay, we're going to build a completely new application. We're going to copy some of the code over from the previous lecture. This is going to be a completely new application. So I can do this inside VS Code, or I can do it in the terminal. It doesn't really matter. One thing inside VS Code is that the terminal is really small. So I'm going to run a few commands outside the terminal, but you can definitely run these same commands in the VS Code terminal. Okay, you're going to CD to where your directory is for this course. Okay, and CD into your lectures directory. And we're going to make a new one. Okay, we're going to make one lecture number 10. And this is going to be Angular multi-view. Okay, CD into lecture number 10. And we're using Angular CLI. Make sure you're always using Angular CLI. Don't make the code files yourself. Don't create components yourself. We're always going to be using Angular CLI. So I'll do ng new. I'm going to call this my to-do app again, but this one's going to be called multi-view. Okay, let it run. This time we will be using routing. So select yes. And we're still going to be using CSS. I'm still going to be using Bootstrap. Later, we're going to take a look at Angular Material. So if you like Bootstrap, great. You can use it here. Later, if you like Material, great. We're going to look at that too. And then later, we'll actually be using Ionic. Okay, more of a mobile front-end framework. So still select CSS. That way we can still use Bootstrap. And go ahead and let it install and create all the packages. Now, in this video, I'm going to be using Git, just like in the previous videos. So just like you should be doing from the challenges. So if I were starting the challenge, I would go to challenge 3 on GitHub Classroom, and I would then clone that repository. Now, inside that repository, you'll see a code directory. So I just said ng new to do app multi-view. So let's just assume this is your challenge 3. You would CD into the code directory, and then you would create an Angular app in there. Okay, and then you'll have your Git repository, and you'll be making commits and merging the master, just like we're going to be doing in this video. So you see it successfully initialized a Git repo. Now, if you do this inside the code directory, it will probably ignore the Git repo because I have one on the outside. So on the outside package, it actually has a .git file. And if Angular senses that Git file in a parent directory, then it won't initialize one in the subdirectory. Okay, so don't be alarmed if it did not initialize the Git file. That's okay. And I'm going to go ahead and do a git push right off the bat. Let's see, you actually need a CD into the directory. And I'm going to do a git commit. I think I said push earlier. I'm going to do a commit. So right off the bat, I want to be able to push the initial state of the application. Okay, now you'll see actually when it added the git repository, it already added all the files in there for me. That's nice. I really like Angular CLI and how it takes care of a lot of the implementation for you. Okay, it's similar to Amazon AWS. I like AWS because they do a lot of stuff for you. So it already did an initial commit for us. So if we do a git log, let's see if there's one there. You'll see it made one for me. And look what it labeled. It labeled initial commit. So whenever I do ng new, it builds an app, puts a git directory there, and then does the first commit for you. Okay, and that's really nice. And right off the bat, we can do an ng serve. So now that the application's built, I'm going to come into VS Code, and now I can open it. So I'll go over to open, go over to your lecture directory. So we're in lecture 10. I'm in to-do app multi-view. Let's open that up. And you'll see all the application files here. So we're mainly going to be in the source, and we're mainly going to be in app. And you'll notice a new file here. We have app routing. That's a new file that we haven't seen before. Go ahead and open up a terminal if you haven't done that already. Okay, and I'm going to directly do an ng serve before I build anything. Just make sure this thing runs. Make sure your Angular CLI is working. Make sure it matches with your node version. You'll see it's compiling here. You'll want to go ahead and compile it. And what's nice is I can leave it running while I'm building it. So I can actually see the changes on the fly. So go ahead and let it build. It should build quickly because it's pretty much an empty app. And you'll go to localhost 4200. And remember, this is the default application here. Okay, so now that it's running, I'm going to go ahead and create 2 components. So in regular web development, you usually will call them pages. In Angular, we're going to call them components. If you're still not sure on this terminology, that means you really need to go back, look at the slides, go back over the last videos, go back over the Angular IO documentation. Okay, you should know directives, components. You should know all these keywords by now. What's a structural directive? What's Angular routing? What is that? Okay, you should have some idea of what that is before watching this video. Otherwise, you'll write the code down, but it's not going to make much sense. So make sure you know the concepts. They're going to be tested on. Okay, so I'm going to create a component. I'm actually going to start a new terminal here so I can leave my other application running. Okay, you'll see it's compiled successfully. And now I'm just going to do an ng generate. Remember the 3 commands? What are the 3 most important commands for Angular CLI? That's going to be a quiz question. Ng new, ng generate, and ng serve. So if I do ng generate, hit enter, we'll see all the elements that we can generate. We didn't really go over this in the previous video because I just wanted to make a basic Angular application. So you'll see here, I have some different commands. I could do an app shell, application, class, component, directive, enum, guard, interface, library, module, pipe, service. Okay, ones that are important are classes. We're going to be using classes. We're going to be using components. We're going to be using interfaces. We're going to be using services. Okay, so some of these you should know already, and if you don't, that's okay, but you should go over them now. Okay, what's a service? What's an interface? We're going to be using OAuth guards. So what's a guard? What's a directive? What's a component? What's a class? Okay, you should know these. Right now, I'm just going to generate a component. Now, a component's like a page. Although it doesn't have to be a page. It could be a nav bar. It could be a button. It could be an image. A component is a single element on the page. It could be the entire page itself, or it could be as small as a button, generating your own custom button. Okay, it just depends on how big, how small the components are for your application. I'll just do ng generate component. It's going to ask me for a name. Now, I like to put my pages or my components in a directory. So for Ionic, I usually call them pages, but for here, I'm going to call them components. So I'm going to use components with an S. I'm going to make a components directory, And then inside that, I'm going to make my first component, which is going to be login. Okay, you'll see it made it quickly. Here's all my components. They're nicely formatted. Right now I only have one. I'm actually going to generate another one because we're going to use routing here. And I want to show you how simple routing is. A lot of students overcomplicate routing. It's actually not complicated. So let's see, I want to generate a component. Okay, let's spell this correctly, generate component. And my next one, I'm going to put it in the same directory, components / homepage. Okay, now I have two. So when I open up the components directory, you'll see two components in the components directory. Okay, this is nice. You should structure your program. Don't just have 50 components all in the app directory. Go ahead and make subdirectories, and maybe in the components directory you have subcomponents. So let's say on your home page you had 5 components for the home page. So you'd have homepage directory and then each component inside that directory. Okay, so make sure it's nicely structured. So I'm generating these two components, and I'm just going to focus on pure Angular routing here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to build a login, and then our home page is going to be the original to-do app, except we're going to fix it up. Instead of using reference variables, we're actually going to use reactive forms. Okay, and that's one of the tutorials that I wanted you to go over. Okay, it talks about user forms, and it talks about reactive forms in this. Okay, creating form groups and form builders. If you go over here to built-in features, they really talk about the differences. So we did a template-driven form. Today we're going to look at a reactive form. You'll see reactive forms are more robust, more scalable, reusable, and testable. Okay, here it says if you want to get a simple form up and it's easy to add but doesn't scale very well, then go ahead and try a template-driven form. And that's what we did on the first form. Okay, that's the easier way to set it up. That's the quicker way to set it up. We're going to take a look at reactive forms today. It's a little bit harder to set up, but as it says here in the documentation, it's a little bit better to use. Okay, it just depends on what application you're creating. So make sure you read this tutorial. Make sure you read this document. This is an important document here. You'll see quiz questions from this page right here. So now I have two of them, and I'm actually going to go and fix up the routing module. Okay, so at the beginning we had the component CSS, component HTML, component TypeScript, and the app module TypeScript. So the module, that's mainly where you're going to have imports. Okay, you're going to have imports, and it's going to work for all of the components on your page, or all of them. You know, all of them will access this app module TypeScript. This is where your main imports go. And then you'll have your component.TypeScript. This is going to be your main controller. Okay, this could be your main controller, and you'll see here's the title. You'll see the titles here, and I'll have a title in some of the others. Okay, I can specify a title here. One of the parts on the challenges is to change the title dynamically. Okay, so you'll write some code there. And then here's my main HTML file. If I scroll all the way to the bottom, they have a template there for me, but I have router outlet. Okay, so whenever I click on a router, so whenever I use Angular routing and I click on a route, it's going to be inserted here. And the routes are then going to be put back into this single page application in the app root. Okay, so we have a lot of these here. Here's app root, and if I go back to app component, here's routing outlet. Okay, so all the different routes will go and be inserted here. So first things first, let's fix up this router module. Okay, if I want to use those 2 pages I just created, I need to add imports for them. So I had to import up at the top. Okay, I'll leave this blank for now. And it's going to be from our current directory, period, / and you'll see I have a components directory, and in there I have a login, and in login I have a login component. Okay, so I'm going to import that, and now when I come back over to here to the brackets, I just type L, and it'll type the import for me. I'm going to import login component. I'm also going to import the home page. Okay, so I usually like to write this out. Now we're going to be using home page component. inside the brackets, inside the mustaches, type in an H. VS Code will auto-complete it for you. Now I need to add that into the actual imports itself. Okay, so I've added the imports, and now I'm going to add it into the routes. Now the routes is really simple. Okay, it's just an array. Look at this. Routes is an array. And essentially, every time I want to move to a new page, I'm going to loop through this array, and I'm going to load the corresponding element or corresponding component. Now this route needs two elements for information. First is the path. What's going to be in the URL? So if login is in the URL, then I'm going to load the following component. Okay, so what component I'm going to load the login component. Okay, and I'm going to do a comma here. You'll just see it's a bunch of its routes is essentially a JSON array. So here's my next route. Okay, make brackets here. The path in the URL is going to be home. If you see home in the URL, you're going to go to this component. We're going to go to the home page component. And you'll usually end it with a comma. That way, if there's another element, you can add it in easily. It's a little bit weird syntax, so it'll work with or without the comma. But you'll see all the documentation usually has a comma there just to get ready for the next one. Okay, so I've added these two routes. Now, the order here is important. If I go back to the documentation and look at routing, and if you read through this, which is what you should do, and if I scroll down here, the routing order is important. The order of the routes is important because the router uses a first match wins strategy when matching routes. So whatever is first match will be selected. Okay, so it's a greedy algorithm. So more specific routes should be placed above less specific routes. This is similar to CSS. Remember specificity. Okay, list routes with a static path first, followed by an empty path route, which matches the default route. The wildcard route comes last because it matches every URL, and the router selects it only if no other routes match first. We're going to talk about this wildcard route. Okay, that way we can handle custom 404 errors, okay, which is something you should do. So the order is important. So login page comes first because that's going to be my first page I want to open. And then the next page is home page. Okay, so make sure the order is correct. It'll work if you switch the order, but if you have 100 or 1,000 routes, then the order is very important. Okay, now I can run this, but you're going to see the template. Okay, and actually we are running it. So let me move this zoom out of the way, go back to the app. You'll see this is what we see right now. Let's remove that template. So go back to app component HTML and let's get this out of here. The only thing that should be in this file here is router outlet. Now everything from the router is going to be placed here, and everything for every component is going to be placed here because it's a single page application. So inside this app component.html, we can actually go ahead and add some code. Okay, so let's say I want every route to have an H1, and no matter what page I'm on, I'm going to display Angular to do router app. And let's say I wanted to make a nav bar. Okay, so I can make a nav bar. Inside the nav bar, I'm going to have an unordered list. Inside the unordered list, I'm going to have a list item. And there I'm going to have an A tag. Now watch how easy it is to use Angular routing. All I have to do is specify router link and then specify where I want to go. So I'm going to go to /login if they select this A tag. And I'll also specify the router link active. Okay, so there's going to be an active link. And then what do I want to display to the user? So I'll just say login page. And then I'll make another list item. Okay, with another A tag. So I'm going to actually copy this one and just switch it up a little bit. Okay, this A tag is going to go to the home page. And Here we're just going to specify home page. Okay, that's it. We have our first Angular routing app. Okay, so if I come back to the page, you're going to see this. If I click on login, you'll see the login page loaded. If I click on home page, you'll see the home page loaded. So this is what you need to do for the challenge. And look at the URL is changing. I click on login, it goes to login. If I click on home page, it goes to home. And I can actually take this link, go over here to an incognito window, paste it, go to home. You'll see home page was loaded. So on the challenge, it says fix the endpoints. By using Angular routing, you just fix the endpoints. Okay, how many lines of code did we add? We hardly added any. I added 7 lines of code here, and I added maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 lines of code here, and I created the 2 pages there. So now Angular routing is working. So it's very simple. If I want to switch pages, I'll use a router link. This is switching pages on the front end. We can also switch pages on the back end, which we're going to look at here in a little bit. But for the current challenge, you really don't need much of a back end. You can just use these router links here. Okay, so don't overcomplicate it. You can have the nav bar up at the top just like this, and then you can style it up with Bootstrap, Material, whatever you want to use. And then essentially when they click on About or Contact, it'll go there. Or if they click on Home, it'll show the home page. And so you'll have 3 components. So you have an About component, a Home component, and a Contact component. And inside the HTML and CSS, you'll fix it up. If you have CSS that you want to apply to all of the components, you can put them in here, appcomponent.css, or you can even put them here in styles.css. This is your global styles. Okay, you'll see that here. So if you want styles to work on all components, you can put them more in the parent directory or the parent component. And that's about it. Okay, that fixes the endpoints. That fixes a lot of the issues that we're having in that challenge just by implementing Angular routing and then putting your nav bar up here at the top. Now, in addition, you could make a nav bar component. And that's probably the best way to implement this page, is to actually have a nav bar component, and you'll insert the nav bar component. Actually, they have some tags here. They have a tag called nav bar component. And now go here, you'll have it's called a header and a footer. So you have a header and a footer, and then your router outlet. The header will get inserted up above, the footer down below, and then each component will get inserted right here into router outlet. So that'd probably be a little bit better and a little bit more Angular by implementing a component for this. Okay, but we're going to keep this simple just at first, and let's get this thing to work. Okay, next for Angular routing, and you're going to need to do this for the challenge, you should add the wildcard. So let's take a look at what the wildcard is. The wildcard looks like this. Okay, I'm going to path, and I'm going to do star star, which means anything. Whatever they put in there, I'm going to load this following component. And now we're going to use a page not found. So this is a 404 error, page not found component. Okay, page not found component. Now we don't have this yet. We need to create it. So I'm going to come down here to the Angular CLI, do an ng generate component. And I'm going to put it back in my components directory. So I'll put it in components. And this is going to be page not found. Notice that upper camel case there. That way I can get this import correct. Page not found, upper camel case. You'll see it actually separates it by dashes. And then I can actually go and import that here. So I'll do an import from the current directory, go into components, go into page not found, and import the page not found component. Once I do that, I just type a capital P, and you'll see it imports it there for me. Okay, so this is your 404 page. So you should add your custom 404 page right here in page not found. Fix up the HTML. Okay, I'm just going to do a little dummy page, but this is my custom 404 error page. Okay, this is implemented through Angular. You also have your 500 pages, which should be implemented on the server. Okay, on the server, this is a single page application. So if you want 404s to work, you need to implement them in Angular because we're using Angular routing. If you want the 500 custom 500 pages to work, that needs to be implemented by the server. In some cases, you may be able to get the server to run the custom 404 error page, but that's not what the Angular documentation recommends. If you come back here to the Angular documentation, it actually goes over the wildcard. Okay, in the order matters, it talks about the wildcard. It talks about this here, and it talks about 404 pages. Okay, displaying a 404 page. This is how you do it. So make sure you read that documentation. So now if I save it, remember it's running over here. So every time I save, it's going to recompile and show it on the page. So if I come back, do a refresh, go to some page, not here, okay, you'll see my custom 404 page. Okay, it's my custom 404 page. And now it actually has the nav bar still because we actually put that up in the top. So that's why I'm saying having the nav bar in its own component would be better. That way you just display the custom 404 page. But one nice thing about having the nav bar is then they can click on it and go back to the actual application. Okay, so that's how you do 404s. You should also have a redirect. Now the order is important here. So if I go back to Angular routing, and if I put this up at the top, okay, so let's say I had this up at the top. Remember, first come, first serve, or first match is the one that's selected. So if I cut this and put this up at the top, like so, save it, come back to the home page here and click on login. It goes to custom 404. Click on home page. It goes to custom 404. So it always matches this first one, and it will always select the 404 error page. So you always want this to be the last element. This one should always be the last. If you put one in front of it, it'll never get selected. Okay, so let's say I had another one. I put home page right below the custom 404 page. Okay, it would never get selected. So here I'm just going to put a little comment here. This is a wildcard route for a 404 page. Okay, and that's how you should implement the 404 page for this current challenge. You also will want to redirect. Okay, you also want to redirect. So what if they just go to your domain.com and they don't specify login, they don't specify home? Where do you want it to go to? Okay, so this is going to redirect to our login page. So essentially you put a path and you have it as an empty string. And then you'll do a redirect to. We're going to redirect to /login. And then here we're going to do a path match full. Okay, just to make sure that everything lines up correctly. Okay, it looks like I misspelled it here. I should do a path match. And now it should work. So now if I just go into my page here, and let's say I don't type anything, I just go here, it'll go to the login page by default. And if I go to some random page, you'll see the custom 404. If I take this off, so let's say I comment this whole thing out, and I don't have the redirect, and I just go to the home page, okay, you'll see I actually get the custom 404 if I add that in. Okay, so we don't want that. If they put an empty string, we want to go to login. If they put some random page, then we want to go to the custom 404. Now this would have worked if we didn't have this random card. If I were to comment this out, save it, come back to the page here, do a refresh, you'll see if I don't put anything, it just doesn't load anything because I'm not putting anything in the actual router outlet. Okay, so I'm just displaying the nav. Nothing's in the router outlet. So if I don't put a path, it just loads the nav bar, which is what is similar to the application that we wrote in class. If I just go to the home page, nothing shows. When I click on home, the home page shows. When I click on contact, the contact page shows. When I click on about, the about page shows. Okay, so you can imagine this just with a little bit of better styling. That's all it is. But as soon as you add those custom 404 pages, which is what you need, okay, you should have that in there. Now things start to mess up. If they don't add a page, if I go back and take all the paths off, you'll see the custom 404. We don't want that. So then you have to add this redirect. The redirect will usually always go before the wildcard. So you usually have these two elements always at the end of your Angular routes. Come back. Don't put anything on there. Okay, it loads login. You'll see it actually does a redirect to login. And then I could do home page. And if I do something random, you'll see I get the custom 404, which is good. Okay, and this is Angular routing. We got it to work. Don't make it too complicated. Start out with it simple. Come back to the Angular I/O tutorials and read adding navigation. Read routing and navigation. This one's a little bit longer. Okay, this one's a little bit longer, but it actually talks about lazy loading, custom 404s, having a redirects. We did this in the server. Now we have a single page application. We need to implement it here. And you'll see on even the simple tutorial, it talks about router links, okay, getting parameter IDs, and it talks about each view, okay, each view and routing to that view and how that works in a single page application. Okay, we're just getting started. We're going to build this whole thing up. We're going to have a login form, check the username and password, go to the home page, and have a to-do list. Stick with Professor Wergeles, and we'll see you in the next video.